Thank you for tuning in to this Spaces discussion for Dementia Researcher. I'm Adam Smith. I'm the Programme Director at Dementia Researcher and based at University College London. And it's my pleasure to be co-chairing today's discussion with the fantastic Kamar Ameen-Ali. Cam, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me now.
Yeah.
Yes, great. I had trouble with my mic there. Thanks, Adam. Hi, everyone. My name's Kamar Ameen-Ali, and I'm a research associate at the University of Glasgow, where my research involves understanding brain injury as a risk factor for dementia, but I'm also a regular blogger for Dementia Researcher.
Wonderful. So if you're just catching up on what we're about, Dementia Researcher provides a supportive community for early career researchers, producing careers, content and science, news, and hopefully supportive content, publishing blogs, podcasts, curating jobs, events and funding calls and more. Our overall aim being to attract more people to work in dementia research and support those who choose this career path to remain. And we have wonderful partners in the NIHR, Alzheimer's Research UK, Alzheimer's Society, and we also work with some fantastic other partners, the Alzheimer's Association and Race Against Dementia. It's with those aims in mind that all this week we've been focusing on some of the challenges faced by postdocs, who we, of course, are also early career researchers, but particularly in dealing with challenges of career progression, short-term contracts, and transitioning into independence. To round off the first week of focusing on this topic, I'm delighted to be joined by four truly inspirational professors from different areas of dementia research. They've all been through the pain, navigated the maze, and we're going to hear how they did it and get some advice from them. So it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Claire Surr, Professor Tammaryn Lashley, Professor Tara Spires-Jones, and Professor Louise Serpell. So Cam, over to you.
Thanks, Adam. Okay, shall we start with some introductions? So if you could briefly tell us who you are and what you do. And let's start with something a little bit fun. So in an alternate reality, what would your career be and why? So let's start with Tara.
Thanks, Cam. In an alternate reality, someone would pay me to read sci-fi novels. I don't know who, but that would be my alternative career choice, top choice. Do you want my regular introduction as well?
Yeah, that'd be good, but it's great to have another sci-fi novel fan.
Yeah, so in my normal reality, I'm Professor of Neurodegeneration and the Deputy Director of the Centre for Discovery Brain Sciences up here at the University of Edinburgh. And I'm a group leader in our UK Dementia Research Institute. And we study Alzheimer's disease and in particular synaptic degeneration and synaptic resilience.
Thanks, Tara. Should we have an introduction from Claire?
Hi, Cam. Hi, everyone. I'm Claire Surr and I'm Professor of Dementia Studies and the Director of the Centre for Dementia Research at Leeds Beckett University. So the research that we do is dementia care and services focused research around a range of different areas. My main interests are particularly around dementia education and training and workforce development, and also psychosocial interventions and how we can use them to improve care in formal care settings. In an alternate reality, I think I would have loved to have been an archaeologist and probably spending a lot of time in fields on my hands and knees with a trowel in hand and a paintbrush probably. So yeah, that would be me.
That sounds like a very exciting alternate career. I'm not sure if Louise is, she's got access to speak yet. So shall we move on to Tammaryn's introduction?
Yeah, thanks, Cam, and hi, everybody. My name's Tammaryn Lashley. I'm Professor of Neuroscience at UCL, Director of Research at Queen Square Brain Bank, and my main focus of my research is to study the post-mortem human brains with a particular interest into the frontal temporal dementias, looking for clues of how these diseases actually take hold in the brains themselves. So that's my actual reality. In my alternate reality, I guess in hindsight of different events throughout my life, I would have probably chosen a career path in a special needs education and levelling up education for all those that find it difficult to access the normal normal education we provide in the country. So that would be my alternate reality.
Thank you, Tammaryn. Louise, are you able to speak at the moment, or is it not accessed yet?
I've just sent Louise an email, and I have invited her, but I'll keep trying. Okay,
no worries. We'll move on to the first question then, and we'll get an introduction from Louise when she's able to access her microphone. So now that we know who you all are and what you do, so you're all pretty amazing individuals who made the 1% of the 1%, and you made it to professor. So could you tell us a little bit about your path to where you are now, and touch on whether you always planned to have a career in academia, or if you spent time working outside of academia since obtaining your PhD? So let's start with Claire.
So, yeah, I suppose I kind of knew when I was at university that I wanted something to do with research, but I didn't really know you could really have a career in it, I guess. I perhaps thought maybe I don't think I imagined being an academic at that point. And I actually had when I'd finished my undergraduate degree, I had a place to do a PGCE to qualify to be a teacher. So I think I've taken Tammaryn's alternate career, and I was actually going to do English and special educational needs. But then I got the opportunity that a PhD studentship came up in my department with Professor Tom Kitwood, who had been my psychology lecturer and my dissertation supervisor on undergraduate level. And then I was fortunate to get that, and I've kind of never looked back, really. I think at one point I did want to be a researcher working on television programmes like Horizon and things. So I think I've always thought about doing some kind of research, but I don't think I ever thought I'd be the person doing the research they might put on a TV programme like Horizon. And I haven't really spent any time working outside of academia. I followed a very traditional academic career route, really, so I haven't done that.
So it's almost as if, you were drawn to research but didn't necessarily plan for a career in academia, which is quite interesting because it's something that I hear quite a lot, that, it's not something that people necessarily plan, but they just follow what they're interested in, and that's the path that they end up going down. Tammaryn, how about you? Can you tell us a little bit about your path to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. So I didn't really plan to set out in academia either. So when I was doing my undergrad, I had sort of a focus of that I wanted to do some kind of forensic science career. And as we know, it's quite difficult to set out in that kind of career. So I actually got a job as a research technician at the National Institute of Medical Research in Mill Hill. Just to get lab experience. I didn't do too great in my undergraduate, so the opportunity of going directly into a PhD wasn't there at that time. So I thought, well, let me go and get a research technician position if I can, which I was successful in doing, to get the lab experience, see whether I liked working in the lab. So I worked there for 3 years on spinal cord regeneration. And then obviously, as we all know, grant funding comes to an end, and I needed to look for another position. And I moved to the Institute of Neurology again as a research technician for one of the pathologists, Professor Revesz, who worked there at the time. And again, I was looking for PhD positions, but people just laughed at my undergrad result, and I thought, well, okay, maybe a PhD is not for me. So I was quite happy working as the technician, and then it was actually Professor Revesz that turned around and said, look, while you're doing the work anyway, we might as well register you for a PhD. So I did do that, and took my PhD part-time whilst I was running the routine histology for the brain bank at the time. And then, completed my PhD, thought about more projects with Professor Revesz, did a few postdocs, and the rest is history, really. So I never really set out to be where I am, and I don't really think I chose dementia research, to be honest. I just sort of started in there and never left, basically. So
that's really interesting, because similarly, you also didn't plan to have a career in academia, but I know that you spent most of your career at UCL, and you've just kind of taken the opportunities that have come your way and followed what you're interested in as well.
Yeah, I think that helps. If you're enjoying what you're doing, then I think you put more effort and not necessarily work harder at it, but I think things come easier if you are enjoying it. So
yeah, definitely. I feel like sometimes it's easier to be motivated especially in this type of career, if what you're doing is what you're really interested in and it's your passion. Shall we how about Tara? I know that Louise has been able to join us now, but we'll speak with Tara first, and then we'll get an introduction from Louise. So Tara, can you tell us a little bit about your path?
Yeah, sure. So I'm from a very small town in Texas, and I went to undergraduate university at the University of Texas at Austin. And to say I was planning a career in academia, I was definitely not. I wanted to be a scientist, but I didn't really know at all what that meant. I had no idea even what a PhD was really when I started. So after undergraduate school, I did a year abroad, and during my undergrad, I did a year abroad in France, in Toulouse. And that's where I met my now partner, and went back to Texas to finish undergrad, and then just told all my advisors that I was going to go to Oxford for PhD work because that's where my partner was living. And they all laughed at me and said, "How are you going to pay for it?" And I got a couple of scholarships and did move to Oxford, and was very lucky to have some support in that from my PhD mentor, Colin Blakemore. And after PhD, I had chatted with a couple of people during the PhD at various meetings and seminars, and heard about some fantastic work going on in Boston. So I went over to interview with Jung Ho Cha, and ended up, while I was there, falling in love with another PI there and his microscopes. So I ended up meeting my postdoc mentor, Brad Hyman, who was also incredibly supportive. Stayed there for postdoc for 2 years, and then Brad recruited me as a junior faculty member. So I ended up being in Boston for 9 years before coming to Edinburgh to bring the group here.
So you've had some pretty big international moves then, which is quite different to Tammaryn, who's spent most of her career at UCL. Should we get an introduction from Louise? So Louise, our first question was if you could tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and also as an additional question, in an alternate reality, what would your career be and why?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sorry to have been delayed. It was complicated for me. So I'm a professor of neuroscience, biochemistry really, but director of neuroscience at the University of Sussex. And my main work really is looking at protein misfolding and how it's involved in Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases. And I had a little bit of time to think while everyone else was talking about what they would have done instead. And I always find it very difficult to think what else I would have done. But I think I'd quite like to have been roaming through the undergrowth in the jungle, looking at animals and watching monkeys and looking at animal behaviour if I'd had maybe an alternative opportunity. So I think that's what I would have done. But it sort of leads on to the other question you were asking about our career trajectories, and just, you know, in a way, one of the things that I often think is I carried on being a research scientist because I couldn't think what else I would do, which probably isn't a great way of sort of strategically thinking about your career, but it is probably quite true that that's sort of what I did. I enjoy what I do, and I couldn't quite think of making the effort to go in a different direction.
I feel like that's a common theme that's coming across, is that you all really enjoy what you're doing and you're really passionate about what you're doing, and you see that as kind of a key necessity in order to carry on in this career, is to have that passion and have that interest in what you're doing. So I'll move on to the next question. So now that we know how each of you got to where you are now, do any of you feel like you ever got stuck at any particular stage in your career? And if so, what happened to help you get out of that? So Tammaryn, let's start with you first.
I think that, a good question. I don't feel like I got particularly stuck at any parts throughout the career, because I didn't really have an objective to go to the next stage of the career per se. Looking back, I guess probably the stickiest sort of situation where I was about to run out of funding was probably after my third postdoc, when Professor Avers was retiring. So I think it was like a do or die situation, whether I, as Louise said, think about something else that we could potentially do, or do I think of, independent research ideas to take forward for a fellowship. And I actually spent quite a lot of time thinking, what are the transferable skills I could go and do something else, or if I don't give it a go to apply for my own independent funding, would I regret it later in life? And I thought, no, probably I would regret it if I don't give it a go. If I don't get it, that's fine. I can go and do something else. I didn't know what at the time. So I sort of stuck my neck out and applied for my first junior fellowship and was successful. So I think that was probably the stage where I thought, is this for me or isn't this for me? But as it turns out, I was successful in obtaining the junior fellowship. So I don't feel like I was particularly stuck. But then I didn't have, like I said, I didn't really know that I was going to progress to a professor either. So it's kind of a difficult question to answer.
Yeah, I feel like so when you were coming to facing the end of your funding and you were thinking about potentially what your transferable skills were, did you actually spend any time looking for options outside of academia, or did it not get to that stage yet?
I did sort of have like a superficial look around. I wouldn't say I took anything, looked at anything in depth. I think because I was trying to think of independent research ideas to take forward as well. It also coincided with my husband setting up his own business, so things were quite hectic at the time anyway. So no, it was kind of a panic do or die situation, really, I have to say. So no, I did look, but yeah, I didn't really, nothing sort of tickled my fancy to take on as a career after I'd been in the lab as sort of a senior postdoc. So I thought, no, I've got to give this independent career sort of a go and see if my ideas for the research actually, were worth pursuing. So I'm glad AI UK thought they were worth pursuing, because I wouldn't be sat here talking to you now.
Yeah, clearly it really worked out. And Louise, how about you? Did you ever feel that you got stuck at any particular stage in your career?
I feel like I got stuck lots of times, actually. I think there were many times when I thought, gosh, what else can I do? And, difficulties with funding, rejections, knockbacks in papers and that sort of thing. I think that it's a really difficult career because you're constantly being sort of assessed and judged. And so actually it can be really difficult. And I've had times during the time that I've been running a research group when I've had no one in the lab, and then I've had lots of people in the lab, and back and forth. And a little while ago at Sussex, we did a sort of career trajectory, and it was really interesting to sort of look at those ups and downs, because I think it's really important to sort of share those difficulties that we've all gone through when things just don't seem to be going as you hoped they would, and then somehow, and it's hard to say exactly how, you come out of it and you just get one good reviewer comment or something that makes you feel a bit better about things, and then things start to go up again. But it definitely is a roller coaster, I would say.
Yeah, I've often heard academia described as having many peaks and troughs, but for some of us it can often feel like there are more troughs than there are peaks. Claire, how about you? Did you ever feel like you got stuck at any stage in your career?
Yeah, I think there were a couple of times where I felt not stuck, because I think similar to others, I don't think I've ever sort of thought, I must get to, reader, I must get to professor. It wasn't something that's driven how I've worked. But I think you do kind of think about progression. I think just because it's like, what's the next challenge and what's the new things that I want to be able to do. So I think I did feel a little bit stuck, I suppose, when I was a senior lecturer, because I wanted to be doing more research, but there was just a very high sort of administration and teaching workload, and I'm sure many people who've worked in those positions feel exactly the same. And it's really difficult to kind of move forward to think about how you would progress onto a reader and then a professor role when you know that you need to be doing more research and getting more publications to be able to do that. And it's like, where do I find the time to be able to do this? Because there just doesn't seem to be the hours in the day and the days in the week to be able to do that amongst the other demands. So I guess it's just those sorts of managing time demands to be able to I suppose work on your CV and develop in the areas that you feel you need to progress, that can be the real challenge. And I suppose I felt similar when I was in a reader position. It was still very difficult, and I still had quite a lot of managerial responsibilities and slightly reduced teaching. But again, it was still difficult to find the time, particularly for publications at that stage. But I think my move to Leeds Beckett and the post I have now, which is a sort of pure research professor role, and I do teaching, but there's not big teaching demands on me. I kind of volunteer to do the teaching that I want to do, and I do quite a bit of it in PhD supervision, but I feel like I've got a much more balanced role now. But I guess you just have less control over how you spend your time when you are less senior, and it becomes more difficult, I think, to be able to work on those areas and spend time doing things that can help develop your CV if you've got big demands on your time to be doing other things. And I think, learning the skills and teaching and lecturing is really important. And for us as researchers, we do need to be sharing our research with students and inspiring them to want to do research or to apply that. But I think it's nice to be able to have a bit more of a balance sometimes, and that can be really difficult.
Yeah, I was actually quite keen to ask you whether that was what prompted your move to Leeds Beckett from Bradford, was to redistribute kind of that balance from the admin and teaching to more research.
Partly. I mean, I think I'd been at Bradford for 16 years and obviously it had been a great place to be. But I think I was ready for that kind of new challenge a little bit. So I was ready to do something new, and I saw the professorship posts that come up, and there was kind of quite a bit of freedom. They weren't in a particular area. There wasn't it wasn't about setting up a new research centre either and saying, we want to, they were very open about that. There were kind of health professorships advertised, and they were open to people working in different areas of health. So it felt like a good move for me, because there wasn't a pressure also that we want you to set up a big research centre when you arrive, and that we need you to be doing this, that and the other. It was just a chance, I think, to breathe and be a professor for a while, and the centre's sort of naturally grown and happened as part of that, rather than it being something I was tasked with at the start, which would have again taken up, diverted my time from being able to do things such as work on publications and grants. So yeah, I think that's really helped, having a much more flexible role.
Can I chip in with a follow-up question? I mean, this applies to anybody. Obviously there's always been this traditional view that moving around is good for your career. I think the only thing that somebody asked me the other day told me the other day was that it helped how other people perceived them, that when they'd gone from doing a PhD and progressed in the same institution, everybody still thought of them as, it was Martin who talked about it. He still had colleagues that called him young Rosser because he'd been there forever. And whether moving to a new place allows you to kind of fill the shoes of that senior position and be perceived in that way a little bit more. I don't know if anybody has a comment on that.
Yeah, if I could comment on that, because I actually asked Martin Rosser for advice when I was applying for my own fellowship. So obviously I've been at UCL for 23 years this year. So I think it actually depends what discipline you work in and what techniques you want to learn moving forward. Obviously my research is based on post-mortem human brain, so I couldn't really set up another brain bank with over 2,000 brains by myself elsewhere. So I think as long as you can justify why you need to stay in the one place, and quite surprisingly, when I went round and asked advice from many of the senior professors at UCL at the time, a lot of them, to my surprise, hadn't moved from UCL. They were all based at UCL from the beginning. But I definitely think it depends on your life circumstances as well. So I'd got 3 young children. My husband had got his own business as well. So it was difficult for us to move even somewhere else in the UK, let alone move countries. So I think if you can justify it, why you need to stay in the one place. But obviously, if you need to learn a technique and there's an expert somewhere else at a different university or a different country, then I think that, justifies the move as well. So I think it's individual really on where you see your research progressing to, I guess. I don't know what others think about that.
I can completely see that. And also as well, I think we've done a survey recently in iStart, and what came up was, particularly in the UK and US, when asked the question, did they feel they had to move there for their career, it was a much lower proportion of people that said they had compared to those who responded who were in India and Brazil and parts of Africa, and said felt that they had to move to progress their career. Sorry, Cam, you by all means. I'll shut up now.
I know we've kind of jumped onto the next question, but let's
Sorry.
let Tara answer the previous one first. So Tara, just out of interest, did you feel like you got stuck at any particular stage in your career?
Yeah, definitely. I realized I didn't really answer the part of the first question about did I ever leave academia? And the answer is no. I went from being a student and just never left university. But in terms of getting stuck, definitely. The point that I will never forget is when my first child was born, and he was 3 months old, and you only get technically 8 weeks off of maternity leave in the States, but my generous university let me have 12 weeks off, and then I had to take him to nursery and go back to work, and I just didn't think I could do it. So I went to my mentor at the time. I was an instructor, but I was a very, very, very junior faculty member, and I went to Brad and said, look, I think I want to be an EM technician. I think I just want to sit on an EM and do select sections and take images, because then I can spend more time with my baby, and I can work part-time, or I can, just have actually a job that you leave there and only do when you're there and not have to take it with you everywhere. And I will never forget what he said. He said, just don't worry about it. He said, you're brilliant. You will succeed in this job if you want to. Why don't you come back 3 days a week and see how you feel? And then maybe come back 4 days a week and see how you feel. And if he hadn't have suggested that, I think I would have left. And I'm really glad I didn't, because I think this is the best job ever.
That's a good point, because actually, so you've mentioned that it was the supportive environment that really helped you to pursue that and to push through. And without that, you might not have progressed in academia. You might not have pursued it. Would you say that was the situation?
Oh yeah, for sure. I would have done something else. Would have tried to become a technician or left academia, for sure, if I hadn't had that support.
So would you have any particular advice that you'd give to anyone who might be currently transitioning to try and set up their own lab, or to try and make that transition to independence? Do you think that perhaps the most important thing is to kind of have that supportive environment, that support from more senior colleagues around them?
That's definitely a huge part of it, I think, to success, or building your own network, even if it's not within your institution. Like when I was new in Edinburgh, I was lucky enough to become a member of the Fens Cavley Network of Excellence, which is a group of people who are at that stage just setting up their own groups. And we were a hugely wonderful source of support for each other, reading each other's grants and supporting each other and being there and answering questions and, circulating invites for speaking and that kind of thing. So if you don't have it locally, make your own support network, because otherwise I think it's practically impossible to get to the top in this field.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So we were just touching on earlier about moving in order to have a successful career in academia. So we know that many early career researchers particularly have been advised that to progress in academia that they need to move to work to another lab or another institution after their PhD. And I feel like this is particularly encouraged for those who wish to apply for fellowships. And it's often some feedback that people get, or some criticism that people get on their fellowship applications if they decide that they want to stay within the same lab as their PhD or within the same institution. So I'm interested to know what your thoughts are on this. And do you think moving labs or institutions is necessary for career progression in academia? because I know that some of you have moved and some of you haven't. So Louise, let's start with you.
So yes, I did move. So after my PhD, I went and spent 18 months working in Canada at the University of Toronto, and then I worked in Cambridge, and then in Sussex. But I do. I found that very helpful, and it was at a time of my life that it worked for me. I had my children after I'd been to Canada, and so it worked out well. But I think I would hope that maybe the insistence on people moving for fellowships and so on will have declined a little bit, because it really isn't very inclusive, and it particularly affects women who maybe have reasons why they might not want to move on, and I mean everybody actually, and I think it really does need to. We do all need to take into account that we're not just scientists; that we're also parts of a family, and all of that, those aspects, that we're rounded people, that we have lives outside of academia that are really important, and we need to be happy in order to do our best work. So I would rail against that insistence that you have to move in order to succeed. I think that just isn't very inclusive.
Yeah, I think I agree with that having just general demands to move, it's not a very inclusive kind of policy, I guess. But it's interesting that you did move within your career, but that the timing was really, really important for that. And I think certainly for early career researchers, that might be something that can be a benefit to them. And they're perhaps more flexible at that stage in their career, but certainly the timing is important if they are going to move. Tara, so you've had some pretty big international moves in your career. Do you think that it's something that is necessary for career progression?
Yeah, it's a good question. I completely agree with Louise that it's not inclusive as an unwritten or sometimes written policy that people should move. I personally am a bit of a wandering spirit, and so I've loved that aspect and the ability to go lots of places and see people. I think at the moment, even though I agree it shouldn't be, I think there's still a strong drive to have people have some mobility in their careers, not just because of the way they are perceived locally, but because of the way you're perceived externally. So I had stayed in Boston for 9 years, and when I was applying for my first grants in Edinburgh, even though I'd been running a group in Boston for 7 of those years, I got told, well, you're just Brad's postdoc, so I don't see how you're going to be getting independent funding. So I think that practically it's still, at least, well, this was now a few years ago, but it might still be out there. But I think there are some clever ways people can try and get around this. So someone who's brilliant, who I work with, got around this because they had personal reasons to want to stay in a certain geographical location, and in their fellowship they put in some secondments in other institutions. And what that shows is that you're going to be working internationally, and it also gives you a little bit of experience with another system. If you're in the same university for your entire career, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. You just aren't. And in some ways, it's got to be much easier because you don't have to figure out all these different systems. But I think it might help the perception by grant panels that you're making the effort to learn different systems and different spaces and work internationally by collaborating. And you can maybe highlight that in your CV instead of actually moving, because as Louise points out, it's not a very fair thing to have to do if you have a family or other reasons to stay.
So perhaps a actual physical move isn't necessary, but it's more about showing independence from previous supervisors, and certainly if applying for future grants, that's something that you might want to find ways to demonstrate.
Yeah.
So Tammaryn, so you mentioned earlier that if you can justify staying in the same place, then that would be okay. But it might be necessary if you want to go and learn new skills, for example. But I think these are now encouraged in like fellowship applications, for example, where you can go for a few months to another institution and learn those skills, but bring them back. So I do see that perhaps the outlook is changing a little bit, but I'm interested to know what you think about this.
Yeah, I agree, and I completely agree with what Louise and Tara have just said. And I think actually Tara's suggestion of putting secondments down, if that is to learn a new skill, and maybe just go for another couple of months to a different lab to do that, and then bring it back to your own lab, is a good way of dealing with that sort of aspect of things. I mean, I did manage to go to spend some time at New York University during my PhD, although I was pregnant with my first child at the time. So I did get an opportunity to spend some time in a different lab. But I think Tara's suggestion for the previous question is building your networks, and that can always be sort of embedded into a fellowship application, that you've built networks around your independent research ideas, you've got the support around whatever you want to study, I think can also help with those applications as well. So even though you're based at one university, you have the support or mentors from different places to support you moving forward, I think is a good thing as well. But I think everybody's situation's different and everybody's personal circumstances are different. So I don't think there's one size fits all for this at all in any way, shape or form. So I think as long as you can just justify in your applications why you're doing it a particular way, I don't think reviewers can really, they can suggest better ways if they see better ways. But I think as long as you have the justification there, then I think, whichever way works for you is okay.
Yeah, so I feel like building networks is really coming across as the important thing to establish independence, and that doesn't necessarily mean having to move. Even if perhaps you can have experience in another lab, it doesn't mean actually having to physically move there for a postdoc position, for example. And finally, Claire, what are your opinions on this? Do you think that it's necessary to move institutions for your career progression?
I think it's a bit different in the sort of care and services research field, because I don't think that's the sort of feedback you would get on a sort of postdoc application that that you should, it would be looked favourably upon if you moved institutions. I think in my field, it's much more, are you in the right place with the right support to be able to do the project that you want to do? And I think it is a similar thing to what everybody else has been saying about having the right networks. So it may be that your PhD supervisor, you're carrying on some of your doctoral work, or and it's an expansion of that area, so they would make a clear person to support you through a postdoc, but it would then be building up that group of people around you to give you other skills and knowledge. So maybe you are using a different data analysis technique, or you want to recruit from sites beyond the sort of locality of where you're based, so maybe building networks elsewhere for those purposes. And I think that's good for you in sort of building future careers as well, beyond a postdoc application. I think building networks and having other people that you collaborate with and who you can work with and sort of expanding those networks out is really important for career development. Certainly a lot of the research that I do now, all of it's collaborative, but the number of collaborations I've got working with teams all over the country, that's part and parcel of how we all work now, I think. And so the sooner you can build those networks and people go, oh, I know somebody who has done some really good work in that area. I know somebody who's got expertise in using ethnography or certain kinds of data collection methods. They'd be really good to be on our team for this grant application. So I think that's part of sort of career building is getting yourself known and working with people across different networks who then might invite you to also be on their grant applications, because they can see what you might bring as an independent researcher.
So that's interesting that, perhaps different fields might have different expectations, but what really comes across is that building networks is the really important factor. So I'm gonna miss out the next question because we've got another 2 questions, and I want to make sure that we've got enough time at the end for questions from the listeners. And I feel like we've pretty much answered that next question anyway. So what I think is that it's pretty easy to assume that all early career researchers want to progress to become a lecturer and then professors, and not all of them do. Many may be happy to continue as a postdoc, for example, because they really, really enjoy the research that they're doing, but they feel that they have to progress to being a lecturer because it offers more job security and stability. So I'm interested to know whether you think that permanent postdoc positions should be a thing, and if so, who should be responsible for driving that forward? Should it be the institutions? Should it be funders? And how do you think we need to reframe our attitudes to career progress in order to consider this? And do you know whether there are any lessons that we can learn from other countries that might have different models, different frameworks that they base academia on. So Claire, let's start with you.
I mean, I think definitely that people should have that freedom of choice, and there shouldn't be an expectation that everybody is driven to just be on the next step of the career ladder, and I must get onto this, to be a senior lecturer or a reader or a professor, because that doesn't reflect you as a researcher and as an academic. It doesn't make your research any better because you do it as a professor versus as a postdoc. I think it's about people having that flexibility to choose what works for them. And some people are very passionate and they want to be doing the on-the-ground work and doing the data analysis and collecting data. And I think you do get more removed from that. Certainly, in a professorial role, you are managing the research. And if that's not your thing, then, we shouldn't be expecting that people will all want to move to do that. In terms of how people can stay and be happy at whatever level they want to be, we're lucky at Leeds Beckett that there are 2 permanent postdoc researchers who work in my centre. So Laura Boy and Rachel Kelly. Laura's a research fellow and Rachel's a senior research fellow, and they are in permanent positions because that was, as I've built, as the university has supported me to build a centre. What they asked what things would help, and I said it'd be really great to have a couple of postdoc posts to start with, and they were funded on a fixed term basis to start with a view that the university would see how that went, and if we brought in income they would look to make them permanent, and they did that after 2 years of funding them as fixed term contracts. So I think I'm lucky in that sense that I do have that stability that those 2 staff members have, and so that's up to them. I think both of them will be looking to progress through career trajectories, but there's no pressure on them. If they're happy as a research fellow or a senior research fellow, then there's no pressure on them to say you've got to be doing a reader application or we expect you to be a professor. So I think I'm lucky in that sense that we do have that freedom and flexibility. And in terms of who funds it, I think, obviously universities have to fund permanent positions. I think they do have to take a chance, and I think my department shows it's possible to do that. We've got really good income generation that we're able to actually do better, because often you can't put in an application as a lead applicant if you don't have a permanent contract, and so people end up in that endless revolving door of you don't have enough experience to lead on a grant application, but I can't lead on a grant application to get that experience because I don't have a permanent contract, and so I can't apply for a grant that might be a 2 or 3 year grant where I'm costed on at 20% of my total time if I've only got 12 months left on a contract. So I think we've got to work collectively as a system. So I think there's a responsibility for us as more senior academics to be making a case to our universities to say this is what we need. We risk losing people if we have this revolving door of people coming and going on fixed term contracts. And I think it's really important that they invest in that, but also that funders do obviously support that where they can, but we have to work on the basis that funders are only ever going to fund usually short-term amounts of funding for particular research projects, unless you get a lab funded as you might do in other areas. But certainly in my field it would be very rare for a full team to be funded.
Yeah, I wonder as well whether that revolving door of fixed-term contracts that you mentioned, like how that can, ultimately stifle scientific progress. So Tammaryn, what are your thoughts on whether you think permanent postdoc position should be a thing, and if so, who would be driving that forward?
Yeah, I think we need to look at it, academia, more as a business model. So you wouldn't get any industry business model employing somebody for 3 years, training them for 3 years, and then potentially losing that person once they've upskilled themselves for a particular technique or a particular research project. So I think having permanent postdoc positions should be a necessity in academia. to drive the research and the science forward, really, because we can spend, as I said, 3 years training somebody to run a particular thing, and then they're left and we have to train somebody new once we've got more funding for that project or that idea moving forward. Who should be driving it? I think, as Claire said, as senior academics, we should probably be taking this in our hands, I guess, and asking for change from our institutions, and maybe working with funders to see how solutions could be made around making permanent postdoc positions. And I think looking at it from a career development point of view, having gone through being a postdoc, a associate professor, and now professor, I've often found that I've had to sort of up skill set myself for the different positions. So as Claire said, as a professor now, I've spent most of my time managing my team, and less time in the lab, although I do try and put aside at least 2 days a week to go back into the lab and carry out experiments myself, because that's what I've trained to do and that's what I love to do. But I've certainly had to spend time learning how to manage a team to the best of my abilities. So for me, I think if the option was there for a permanent postdoc position when I was at that stage, I think I would have been happy to stay as a permanent postdoc because I just love being in the lab. So I think we do need to make a change, and I think it's down to both the institutions and funders and us as senior academics to drive this forward in some way.
Yeah, I guess it's always going to be a question of funding, isn't it? Because of the current model that academia is kind of based on. We rely on grants in order to fund current short-term contracts for postdocs. So where would the funding come from? And that's something that maybe institutions and funders need to work together to come up with a solution. Tara, what do you think? Do you think that permanent postdoc positions should be a thing?
Yes, in a way I do. I think that academia, like our traditional academic tenure system, is an incredibly privileged system. There aren't very many jobs where you get a job essentially for life. And that you're talking about how comparing other countries. There are some countries in Europe where your post, if you are an academic, comes with some permanent staff positions, and they can be, from my understanding, technicians or postdocs. And in some ways that's great because you've got that longevity in your lab of the skills, and you know that it provides a career path for staff scientists as a long-term career. But in some cases I've heard it doesn't work brilliantly. So I don't know if that's the answer, but I think you're absolutely right, Cam, that it would have to be collaboration between funders and institutions to make that position tenable. So, for example, one thing I can think of that I haven't had any traction with yet, but I think it might be a one model to think about as an ecosystem, is if we can, first of all, convince the funders that just because a brand new postdoc is cheaper, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the best value for the grant, right? So if funders can accept that you can pay higher salaries than a brand new postdoc salary. And also maybe the institution can then underwrite their career saying, as long as you and your supervisor or your line manager can find funding, we will keep you on as a permanent staff member with some buffer of some number of years to pay, that the university might pay their salary, for example, while more funding was sought, that kind of thing. I think that might be a nice balance, so that you're linked to projects and sure it was going to be productive and it was funded with consumables and you weren't just sitting in a lab with no funding to do anything, but you also have that backup so you don't have to leave and move, because postdocs in many ways are the lifeblood of the actual day-to-day work in the lab. So we want to make that a career path. And I absolutely think it's a lovely path. I agree with Tam. I do spend a couple of days a week in the lab if I can, and I think it's an ideal career, and I think we should support it and value it. Yeah.
Well, there we go. We probably have a potential solution. Louise, what are your thoughts on permanent postdoc positions?
Well, I think a lot of it's been covered already, and I actually think it's really important, at least to provide that opportunity. I have several postdocs that have worked with me who do want to stay as postdocs, and I think what I really wanted to say is how valuable those people are and how important it is not to lose their expertise. And it's frustrating not to be able to provide that opportunity for people to stay as postdocs if they want to, and be able to stay at the bench doing the things that they were trained to do and the things that they're really good at. So I don't know what the answer is in terms of funding, though, and I think certainly I don't know about other people's universities, but universities in general at the moment are undergoing lots of financial pressures. And I think, it's really hard to think about how the university would fund permanent postdocs, but whether that's something that some of the research councils or charities might consider doing, particularly in Alzheimer's disease research. I think, that incredible expertise that people build up would be really impressive if we could find a way of keeping in so I think it'd be a really good. So, and obviously what we need to do is to support those people choices that they want to carry on as a postdoc. So I'm not suggesting that we try and keep people, when they want to progress and into another role. But if that's the choice of the individual, I think it would be really good if there was a mechanism by which we could keep people on.
Okay, so in the interest of time, so that we have enough time for questions from the listeners, I just want, in my last question, in just 1 or 2 sentences, what advice would you give to postdocs or research fellows who may feel that they're stuck and not progressing through their careers, perhaps how they wanted to or how they might have expected to? So just in 1 or 2 sentences, what would your advice be? So let's start with Tammaryn.
I just think in a couple of sentences it would be to network and talk about your career path with either mentors at your university or reach out and speak to other people that are in your discipline. To network and talk, really.
And Louise?
I think this is probably advice for all different roles and perspectives is just to ensure that you're somebody who's surrounded by supportive environment, people who are interested in your career and are interested in helping you and supporting you for what you decide you want to do. So I mean, in a way, the same sort of thing as networking, but that level of support that I think is really important, that would mean that not only would you be able to carry on, but also feel better about where you currently are and how much you're valued as that in that role.
And Claire, what advice would you give?
Yeah, those were my 2 points that everybody has already said. I think another thing would be to look at your CV and work out where the gaps are in the experience that you want to get, and seek out and take whatever opportunities you can. So don't be afraid to ask and speak to that supportive network you've got and say, look, I really want to develop this area. How can I do that? And say yes, put yourself forward for things. Don't be afraid to get in touch with people and build those networks and ask if you can, I really want to do this. Could I come and join your team for a bit to learn more about that? So I'd say put yourself out there and make connections. People quite often say yes. If they're the right supportive people, they'll want to help you, even if they're not in your immediate sort of team or university.
And finally, Tara.
Thank you. So 2 sentences. If you love it, keep going, persevere. It's not the career path for everyone, but it is amazing. So keep trying. But on the other hand, the second sentence is don't be afraid to leave. Everyone I know who has left academia for science in other venues or industry or gone into other careers has absolutely loved it and not regretted it at all. So that would be it.
That's excellent advice, and I've just written a blog on leaving academia. So, Adam, do we have time for any questions from the audience?
We do. We can take a few questions. So if you're listening and you have a question for any of our speakers, in the bottom row of your app, you should see the heart button with a little plus next to it. If you tap on that, I think raise your hand is one of the options there, and then we can activate your microphone. We did have a question from Yvonne Couch, although she's sent me this via text message. So I'll put this to you now. She says she's in a super noisy lab, so she can't turn on her microphone, but she'd like to know what you think about how the landscape has changed. How is it different for a postdoc now, say, to 4 or 5 years ago? Has the landscape changed for postdocs in terms of how easy or harder it is to progress? Why don't we put that to you first, Louise?
Gosh, that's a really hard question, because it's a really hard question. I think in a way it felt a bit more straightforward when I was a postdoc. I think I've already said that I didn't really have a sort of strategic plan, and I think people now do have strategic plans. They're a bit clearer about what next and how they need to they need to progress and move on. And I don't know why. Honestly, I don't know if I know the answer to this. I think I'm going to have to pass on to someone else. But I just don't feel like I really thought about it. I just did, and it sort of worked out. It was very haphazard, and there was a huge amount of luck involved. So that's not very helpful at all. Sorry.
No, I think you're right. I think being in the right place at the right time, and luck definitely comes into it. I don't know if other people would agree. I mean, of course, you can make your own luck. Tara, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was talking to my friend and colleague Claire Surr earlier, and she said luck is a huge part of it, but hard work is another huge part. So you're unlikely to succeed without the hard work, and hopefully you get the luck. In terms of how postdocs have changed over the past few years, unfortunately, I would say it's harder to get fellowships right now because of the Brexit and economic climate. So I think it's a bit tougher to progress at the moment, but that could just be my perception.
No, I think you're right. I mean, we've had particularly anybody who relies on the charities for funding, we have had a year without funding, and of course that's created a gap. So it's doubled up the number of people applying right now. Something that's come up. Just a reminder to anybody to raise your hand if you want to speak, and we'll turn on your microphone so you can ask your question. Something that came up. One of the reasons why we're even putting this focus on this week. Was from a few of our listeners who've contributed to the podcasts we've produced this week, which is this feeling of, I think it was 3 of them had 6 contracts that ranged in length from 6 months to 2 years, and feeling like they obviously had put down roots, but then that was always a limiting factor because they were always stuck only being able to look at contracts and new jobs that were within a certain distance of where they were, and just found it challenging. So many were dependent upon having partners then who had permanent jobs to just be able to do practical things like buy new cars, to get a mortgage and things like that. What would you say to anybody who's feeling kind of, I don't know if this question's been asked, that's got to the end of this, that's had a fellowship and is now coming towards the end of their senior fellowship, about what they do next, those that are panicking? I've got to put this to somebody, haven't I? What about Tammaryn?
Oh, I was hoping you wasn't going to ask me.
So let's give you a scenario. So you've done 4 postdoc positions. You're just coming to the end this year of your senior postdoc, and you're not sure what comes next. Where do you go from there?
I think that was the kind of situation I found myself in anyway. So I had major panic attack, to be honest. But then I just, made meetings with all the senior professors at UCL and went and discussed my career, how my career had progressed so far, where I thought I could see myself fitting into either known projects that were already carrying out at UCL, what I would like to do as my independent research. And that sort of opened up opportunities to apply for funding, or they directed me to different funding opportunities. So I think you've got to go and, these were, like Martin Rosser, Nick Fox, John Hardy, although John was my head of department at the time. So although I hadn't worked closely with these senior professors at the time, I found it quite daunting because I'm not a naturally sort of outspoken, will put myself, at the forefront of things. So for me, it was really difficult and really challenging to do that. But I just sat one day, sent them all emails. They were all very responsive. And, I think I spent the whole week just doing a tour of UCL, meeting people and getting their opinions around things. So I think even if you find it difficult, people are quite receptive to want to help people progress in their careers if they see that it's going to be beneficial to them and maybe other projects in the university as well. So never be afraid of going and speaking and seeking advice. Like I said, it was completely outside my comfort zone, but I think that was the turning point in my career where I actually realised, I can do this. If, you know, I put myself out there and come up with the ideas, I've got a shot of doing it. So, yeah, and I think one other piece of advice I would give for the last question as well, about not progressing, is don't compare yourself to other people. And I think that's what I spent a lot of time doing as a junior postdoc, is seeing other people progressing, but then comparing my situation and my sort of area of expertise with other people that were, say, working in cell biology or genetics. And I don't think you can compare across different disciplines either. So I think, you know, don't compare yourself to others, and go out and network and speak to people of how they can be supportive with your career as well. You can't do it alone. You need the support of others. So, yeah, definitely get yourself out there and speak to others. And
I guess that brings you back to this idea of that mentors aren't just something, you know, something that you have very early in your career, that you can have a network of mentors who you can go to at different times with different challenges and prepare this right from the earliest stages. Even as you know, we did a podcast at the earlier in the week from postdocs speaking back to PhD students to say, is there anything you can do very early on in your career that will help you potentially avoid this problem later down the line?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and even now I know my network of people who I can sort of rely on really to go to, and I don't go to the same person to speak about the same thing. So, you know, I'll have one person I know I can speak to about one certain topic, but I've definitely got senior professors at IO, at the Institute of Neurology, and UCL, who I know, you know, I can drop an email, could we just have a 5-minute chat? And they're just so supportive. So reach out to people. And likewise, I'm passing that forward now to people that are applying for their junior fellowships. I'm helping them with their applications, you know, listening to what their concerns, reservations are. If I can pass on any help to people coming through, then by all means get in touch. I'm happy to help where I can. So.
Thank you. It doesn't look like everybody's been a bit shy today. It doesn't look like anybody's got any questions. So last call for questions. But Cam, do you want to summarize? Do you want to summarize the takeaways, do you think?
I feel like it's very easy to feel like you're stuck at the postdoc stage. But I really like all of the advice of building your own network, because I feel like I have seen a lot of people being advised to move, and that can create issues, and it can also stifle research in some ways, because every time you have to move, you have to learn, you know, where is this piece of equipment? How does this work? And you have to deal with moving and all of the challenges that comes with. And you might be leaving your support network that you've established where you currently live, such as your family or friends that you have. So I like the idea of building a network that is independent from your PhD supervisor or your first postdoc supervisor, and not necessarily having to move in order to do that. I feel more hopeful after having this discussion. I feel more positive, and I also like what Tara said about, you know, if you want to leave academia, that should be supported, and we should be encouraging people to look outside of academia for their career progression as well.
Absolutely. And I think the important point, hopefully institutions and any research funders that might retrospectively be listening to this, is to really think hard about how you can fund things differently, to introduce that stability, which I think will really benefit researchers and people's careers, for those that, you know, do want to stay in the one place and get on with doing the research. Is there any last points anybody would like to make before we wrap up today?
I think I'd just like to make one more point about, we've all been through quite a rough time over the last couple of years with COVID, but we can actually use that to our advantage with now. I mean, we don't even have telephones at UCL anymore. Everything's on Teams. But with the video calling, it's easier to get in touch with people. It's easier to just have a quick 5-10 minute call with people. So look at the advantages of that. with networking, right, you know, you can stay where you are and still be in touch with people. So
definitely, and social. I mean, social media, of course, is evil, but it's also wonderful as well, and you know, has this real potential to allow you to connect with people, doesn't it? And of course, on the Dementia Researcher website, we have bios on not only all of our fantastic panelists today, but lots of people who've contributed blogs and podcasts and things to our website. You can filter through those according to their different research field or where they work. And details of their Twitter accounts and contact details are all in there. So if you're looking for somebody to talk to, everybody who's got a bio on there has agreed to be contacted by listeners. So please do go and have a look at that as well if you're looking for somebody who works in your field. Thank you so much, Cam, for hosting with us today, and also the podcasts and blogs and things you've contributed this week. To our wonderful guests, Professor Tara Spires-Jones, Professor Claire Surr, Professor Tammaryn Lashley, and of course Professor Louise Serpell. I forgot your name then, Louise. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank
you. We'll let you get back to your Friday.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.